Who is January Jones? She is not a young, beautiful, talented actress on Mad Men. She is not an older, gorgeous, exotic dancer from the Johnny Carson show. She is an author, and she wrote Thou Shalt Not Whine, the 11th Commandment, that reached #1 at Amazon.com. She is a reality TV golf personality with World High Stakes Golf televised on HDNet. She is a humorist and winologist expert. She is your featured host today on January Jones Sharing Success Stories. So sit back, relax, and get ready to laugh and listen to Ms. Jones with her eclectic roster of guests as you learn life's lessons. These stories plus sharing equals success. Welcome, and remember, beware, because you are entering the no whining world of January Jones.
Now let me ask you a question. Do you think being equal means being the same? Can you imagine what it would be like to be a woman business owner and be able to harness female strengths and be successful? Have you ever wanted to know why men don't see leaders when women lead? They kind of ignore them. Now would you like to learn what happens when male finders look for when evaluating women leading startups? Have you ever heard of a book called Being Equal Doesn't Mean Being the Same? Now would you like to meet someone who has some of the answers that we're looking for today? Now are you ready to learn how to be successful and how to release your own self-empowerment? If you can answer yes or maybe to any of these questions, then you are in the right place. And I would like to welcome you to January Jones Sharing Success Stories. Today I'll be introducing you to my guest. She is an author and success coach extraordinaire. She will provide us with wonderful information, inspiration, and some really, really great advice for women in business. I'm pleased to announce that this show is now live on Talk4Media and syndicated on 6 networks with over 4.5 million listeners to date. We are archived 24/7 for your listening pleasure. So now it's time for you to sit back and relax as you enter the no wine zone. Pour yourself a glass of wine, get some cheese and crackers, and enjoy our show. Now let me tell you a little bit about our guest today. She is an author and women's entrepreneurship expert. She releases her new book today, self-empowerment book, Being Equal Doesn't Mean Being the Same. She is an author and a columnist, and her book is scheduled to hit stores today. This empowering book focuses on why behaving like a girl can help women to change their lives and grow their businesses. It's my pleasure to welcome to this show today, Joanna Krotz. Hi, Joanna. How are you today?
I'm very well. I'm delighted to be here, actually.
Oh, well, what an exciting day for you. Is this your first book?
No, it's the fourth, but they've all been extremely different, except the last 2 had a theme of women's empowerment. The one before this was about women in giving and philanthropy.
Oh, okay.
And there is some synergy there, actually, in terms of entrepreneurship and giving for women.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about your new book today, and then we'll have to have you back on the show again to talk about your other books. I always like to start the show by having our guests share where your success story began, where you were born and raised, and a little bit about your early mentors.
Yeah, I'm a New Yorker, born and bred. You probably can hear it in the accent. And therefore I do things apparently pretty fast. I went to graduate school in San Francisco, and I was walking down the street, and people would say, "Oh my God, you're just moving too fast." So I didn't think it was a fast pace until I left New York. But it.
You know, I lived in New York for a year when I was very young, and I would go back to the Midwest, and I'd say things like quarter and water.
Right.
and they're going, what language are you speaking?
Yeah.
And New Yorkers do move fast, but they get a lot done, don't they?
Some of them.
Yeah,
Hopefully
true.
I'm one of those, but you never know. And then there's all that New York language. There's soda, not pop, and things like that. So, but in terms of mentors, I was thinking about that because I've heard you ask that question to a couple of other guests, and I just don't feel like I had very many. And I think that's part of what drives my interest in securing comfort zones and parity for women, because I think it's tough for women in business to find mentors. And I've done some reporting and covering of that issue. I think women should have both male and female mentors. I don't think it's a good idea to limit women to women only for many, many reasons, which we can get into. But I have always been driven by what's next. I've traded up jobs quite a lot in my career as a national magazine editor at a bunch of different kinds of publications like Money and Metropolitan Home. And it was always, what's the next change going to be? And I believe I went into media really because I felt this lack of parity, lack of equality for women when I was younger. And it was everywhere I looked at that time, in boardrooms, in academia, on the sports field, in classrooms. And I felt if I went into media, I would be able to somehow influence that perception and get those messages out. And that would be for men as well as for women, of course.
Of course, yeah. And, it was so fascinating when I had the opportunity to schedule this interview, because when I look at so many women in business, they tend to try to emulate and use men as their role models. And you're coming at it from a different angle, that we're more embracing the things that women do and the things they do so well. Isn't that true?
It is, but I think it's a challenging path, because if you're in corporate America or a big company of any size, there's guys at the top, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they're the ones, and they're the ones judging you. I mean, I think there's now 23 women who are CEOs at the Fortune 500. That's 23 out of 500. Yeah. So that gives you an idea. Sure. And also in most corner offices, senior level positions. So those are the people who make judgments, and men make the rules, and they judge benchmarks and performance. And let me give you for instance. It's typical, not every woman, not all the time, but it's typical for women when they get promoted, when they get into a job and they've beaten out a rival, to turn that rival into a colleague, not to cut him off at the knees, not to make him leave the company. You lose institutional memory, you lose skills, you lose talent, but to embrace that person and then make it a collegial relationship. Men tend to not do that. They tend to drive their rivals away. It's like, I win, you lose, done.
Winner take all.
Exactly. And so male bosses, I have seen, and men in positions of power generally, see that as a weakness in women. See that collegial relationship as, she's not tough enough to really get rid of the guy. She's not going to beat that rival out. I think it's foolish. I think it takes a lot more skill and effort and smarts to turn that rival into a colleague. But again, usually women are not making those rules. And so if men see women behaving that way, it's very hard for them to advance. And so my position is, if you can, financially, emotionally, not everyone can, you're better off, for those reasons, running your own show, starting your own business, and doing things with your rules, with the rules that you,
That's probably great advice, because so often, I've heard this complaint and voiced by women in the business world, that when men do something, assert themselves. They're called, everyone says they're tough, they're strong, they admire it. And so many times when a woman asserts herself, she's called a bitch.
Yeah. There's a lot of that. And there have been studies done of negotiations. When women initiate negotiations, even when their position is reasonable or beneficial, they're seen as too aggressive. And coworkers don't want to be around them, and they lose whatever position. So it's a very tricky line to walk, especially if you're in a big company,
Sure.
And I wish it were different, but the pace, and let me be clear, I mean, things have moved extraordinarily from where we started, if
Sure.
you want to call it a start, from when women got the vote, say, in 1920, and when women went into the workforce in large numbers during World War II, and so on and so on. There's been a huge shift, but I still find the pace glacial, and I think the bias has gone underground in many ways. So it's not blatant anymore, but it's very subtle.
Yeah, and I think so many men are, at this point in time, aware of having to be politically correct. And they kind of, as you said, they are very careful about what they do and say in the workplace. But as you commented, it hasn't really changed their feelings, and they go underground with it, which we see happening. Now, when you're suggesting that women launch their own business, and that's a big leap to take for a lot of women, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly it is. Although there's never been a better time for women to run their own show. It's a bit of a paradox, really, because on the one hand, it's very tough for women to rise in the corporate structure beyond a certain level, that whole glass ceiling and so on. And on the other, there are resources that are supporting women's entrepreneurship now that are totally unprecedented. And it runs from coaching and lending policies, still hard for women, but much better than they used to be. There are now angel investors, that is, affluent individuals backing startups, and more and more of those are women angels. Again, this is relative, so not as many as there should be, but certainly many more than there were. And those women are backing women-led ventures. And there's all kinds of resources from multinational companies, Amex, for instance, and Intuit and Dell, because, oh, Lord, it turns out women have wallets.
Yeah, well, I always tell so many of my guests and so many of my sponsors that my market, I'm a granny, and I have 7 grandchildren, and I have quite a bit of money to spend on them.
Right. It's absolutely true. And yet a woman who is somewhat older is not seen as much of a really smart customer. Yeah, exactly. Not much of a market. I just don't get it, frankly.
I don't either, because, women, when they get older, I'm pretty much tired of spending stuff on myself. I've got more than I need or want. And so I do indulge my grandchildren. So there's a real market out there. And a lot of older women are, everyone says you're on a fixed income, supposedly, but guess what? Your expenses as you get older, they decrease. It's usually not. So you do have some income that you can spend and contribute to the economy. And I think it's more than people realize. But speaking of what we realize, I realize I have wonderful sponsors, and we're going to hear from them right now. And when we come back with Joanna, we're going to talk about looking through the gender lens. That's part 1 of her amazing new book. We'll be right back.
Joining January Jones as her co-host on the show is Miles Miller, the great success creator. Miles is a 2-time best-selling author with books entitled Against the Grain and Successonomics. He continues to transform 100,000 people all over the world through his speaking and training. His uplifting and essential messages like Bulletproof, Time Machine, and Strength in Numbers are impacting every audience he meets. Together with January Jones, they'll explore how to be successful and what steps you can take to achieve the success you want. Visit successhq.net, leadup.biz, and learningbreaks.com. With over 30 years as a registered nurse with empathic abilities, Carolyn Green, a.k.a. the Energy Nurse, is bridging the gap between traditional and alternative medicine. Certified in the areas of energy medicine, life coaching, and as a medical intuitive, she brings to each client an integrative approach to body, mind, and spirit. Her book, found on Balboa Press and Amazon, Getting to Know You, Guided Pearls of Wisdom for a More Soulful Existence, is a channel journey for clearing the mind clutter to bring about healthier thought patterns. As a motivational speaker,